In getting started today, I'm sure that everybody, at least from what I can tell, can see my slides here and see my screen. As we get kicked off, of course, we'll start off with some introductions. For those that have been a part of these webinars in the past, and for what it's worth before we truly get started, we have been doing these monthly, and we will continue to do so as cybersecurity becomes more and more important and more in front of the different organizations that we not only partner with, those that we don't partner with, and really bringing small to medium-sized business owners up to speed on what they need to be concerned about. We started off, just for what it's worth, if you didn't get a chance to see it, you can go back and view it. If you'd like, via our website around best practices. We thought that'd be a good way to start off the year around best practices on cybersecurity, what you can do to protect you and your organization, as well as your users. In addition, we went into February talking about Active Directory, what it is, how it benefits your organization, the importance of having Active Directory services in place. And this time we're going to be talking about a variety of different things that I'm going to get into here in a few minutes. So before we get started in getting everything kicked off, I want to first introduce Dustin Liefers. Dustin is on the line today as our cybersecurity manager. Dustin has been with the organization now going on about 12 or 13 years. As such, he is a certified ethical hacker. And Dustin has a lot of experience when you talk in terms of different security suites that exist out there, different security solutions, and the different methods that cyber criminals and bad actors typically employ to try and penetrate, permeate your networks, and in turn create problems for our small to medium-sized businesses owners out there that we work with. Then there's me, Chris Montgomery. I'm the director of sales here with ThrottleNet. I too have been with the organization, well, not quite as long as Dustin, but about 10 years in September. And over those years, I have met with countless small to medium-sized business owners, all of which, especially these days in particular, have a lot of concerns around cybersecurity, what to look out for, how to protect against it, and otherwise. And again, that just reinforces why we have been doing this series of webinars over the last 3 months. So, in getting things kicked off, we're here today to talk about cute slide decks, okay? Obviously, we've got an awesome title. I thought it was awesome because it's a play on words. And if you're a Mike Tyson fan like I was back in the 90s growing up, of course, you're familiar with the phrasing. In this case, a little play on words. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the database, right? So we're going to talk about a variety of things today. We're going to get into why we're even having this discussion in the first place, how these attacks take place, and a variety of other things that we're going to cover right now in our agenda. So again, why are we talking about this in the first place? Who are the culprits? What are their motivations? Why are they doing this in the first place? What types of attacks are there, and what can we do or you do to protect against those attacks? What types of attacks typically compromise small to medium-sized businesses? What verticals are impacted the most? What are the common methods to protect against these attacks? And then we're going to do a little Q&A with Dustin, kind of pick his brain, and we'll be having some discussions with him throughout our presentation today. So as we get kicked off, as I'd said, why are we talking about this in the first place? Well, we're talking about it not just because of the reason on the screen here, which is really simply because small to medium-sized business owners, in a lot of cases, tend to believe that it'll never happen to them, okay? That, you know what, they're going after the big guy, the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000 company. And the reality of it is that, yes, they are targeting those folks. But they can also chew gum and walk at the same time. So while they might be targeting big industries in the Fortune 100 space, like your Edward Jones or otherwise, they're also, through a variety of other methods, able to compromise any network that they want, assuming they have the right conditions to do so. But the other reason we're talking about this is because the countless number of small to medium-sized business owners that I've dealt with over the years, the number one question that I get when I start rolling out things that we've identified and different problems that exist out there, either as their network is concerned or in general, the question I always get is, well, Chris, why are they doing this in the first place, and who is doing this? So we're going to spend some time covering that. So let's talk about first, who's doing it in the first place. Well, first off, I think it goes without saying, organized crime. And not the Tony Soprano type of organized crime per se. A lot of this organized crime is actually organized crime that exists overseas, in countries like India, China, or otherwise. When you talk in terms of India, it's things like big call centers that are calling out, misrepresenting themselves as Microsoft and compromising networks in that way, or sending out phishing attack emails that we're going to talk about in our discussion today to drop a bunch of lines in the water and see who's ultimately going to bite. So again, they can be working diligently to try and compromise a specific industry or organization, while at the same time have everything working in the background and compromise small to medium-sized businesses, as well as the day-to-day consumer. In addition, you have state actors. Okay, these are going to be your Russias, your Chinas, all those that you're familiar with that are conducting corporate espionage, trying to penetrate networks, trying to collect data, that kind of thing. They're always in the background. Okay, so again, that's who's conducting a lot of these attacks. End users. Now, two different types of end users when we talk about this. I don't want you at all to think that end users are the ones always conducting the attack or if they're a major problem, but it's a combination of things. First of all, you are going to have those end users that are going to be working in a malicious way. They're disgruntled employees, they're not happy, they're getting ready to leave, they're going to be terminated, whatever. And as a result, they start going in and doing things across the network, or deleting files or whatever it might be, or making copies of things, or infecting a network. In addition to that, though, there are those that are just innocent bystanders that just click on the wrong darn thing. They click on an attachment, they click on a link in an email they shouldn't have, and then the end result is that's where the problems then begin to occur. And then finally, system administrators. And again, these are not folks, to be abundantly clear, that are conducting the attack. What they're really doing in a lot of cases is creating an environment where the attack is much easier to perpetrate. And the reason is because it's misconfiguration, all right? Leaving open ports on a firewall, not setting up the roles and responsibilities and doing policies properly within the network and Active Directory within the domain. These are things the system administrators can do inadvertently that just create an environment, as I'd said, that is conducive to somebody potentially compromising a network. So that all said, who are the culprits? And more importantly, what are their motives? Now that we've covered who the culprits are and who's conducting them, internal versus external, 80% on average, give or take, depending on what time frame we're talking about here, are conducted externally. These are individuals outside of the organization that are working to penetrate the network, either through open ports or any of the methods that we're going to talk about here in a moment. You do have a percentage, of course, though, where it's internal, and you do, as you'll see when we get into those small to medium-sized businesses most affected, those verticals, if you will, that are most impacted, where they cross one another. There's a bit of a cross-section that occurs. And what I mean by that is that essentially you have an external person working in conjunction with an internal person to commit a cyber attack of some kind. And typically their motives around this are one of two things: financial, right? Going out, trying to get personally identifiable information, trying to get financial information from the organizations that they are targeting or they're able to penetrate. And then, of course, there is a percentage that never tends to exceed about 30% of those attacks that are being done just based on corporate espionage or trying to get proprietary information. And again, a lot of times that's your state actors that are conducting those attacks to try and collect that proprietary information or to reverse engineer things and in turn create their own product as a competitor in the marketplace. So again, that's where you see these really taking place, internal versus external, as well as what their motivations are, be it financial most of the time or espionage, okay? But what are the types of attacks that we see out there? Well, the first few that we're going to talk about here, quite honestly, are ones that I believe most are familiar with. So we're going to cover here for the next few minutes, what are the most common types of attacks that we see out there? In addition to that, we're going to talk about what you can do as an organization to protect or prevent against those types of attacks. So in getting started, we'll talk about a malware attack. Okay, this is probably the most common type of attack that exists out there. I think everybody that I have on the call today in general is familiar with what a malware attack is. They typically come in via an email where somebody clicks on an attachment or a link that they shouldn't have clicked on. It creates things like adware where you get all the pop-ups and everything else taking place on your screen. But again, it can occur just due to a download of clicking on a link, clicking on an attachment, and downloading the attachment. But one of the ways that I've had it happen to me in the past, even being working for an IT company, I'm not completely void of potential for something like this to occur. I was out on a trusted website. I downloaded a specific font that I wanted, and with that font came a malware infection. So again, that's why it's all the more important to be diligent about where you're getting your information, what you're downloading from online resources. In addition, things like infected thumb drives. So for example, social engineering, which is essentially taking advantage of an individual's curiosity, sense of humor, desire to help, whatever the case might be. One of those might be leaving a thumb drive out in a parking lot and having a user come in, say, you know what, I don't know who this belongs to, and the only way I can find out is to plug it into a computer, and that's where an infection begins to take root, okay? So again, these are some of the different ways that malware attacks occur. Now, how can we protect against these? Well, one of the primary ways, obviously, is an antivirus software. Now, not just any antivirus software, but an antivirus software that is centrally managed, monitored, and maintained by a third-party organization. We at ThrottleNet provide a solution to all of our clients with our managed services plan, where we deploy an antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware solution that we monitor, maintain, and manage for them in real time. So again, if you're not partnered with us or with an organization like ours, we would encourage you to look at that type of a solution where you have a centralized location that is managing and making sure that that antivirus solution is as up to date and current as it could possibly be. Of course, use of an enterprise-grade firewall. Enterprise grade meaning typically a Sonic wall or a Cisco device of some kind are the ones that you typically see out there. There are other manufacturers out there as well, like Ubiquiti and a few others. But at the end of the day, this is not the router or the firewall that you're going to buy at Best Buy most of the time, or that you're going to need at Micro Center. This is going to be more of an enterprise-grade firewall that is going to have additional feature functionality and cybersecurity features baked into it that allow you to create a much more secure network and essentially build that moat around the network to protect from the outside. Again, staying alert to avoid clicking on suspicious links. Again, this is a bad idea when you're just clicking through things without paying attention to what it is you're clicking on, especially if it's an unsolicited email. That's where your problems can really begin to occur. And then finally, making sure that you update your operating systems on a regular basis with all patches and updates and these security updates that come down from Microsoft, as well as your browsers. And that really goes for any application that you're using. We're going to talk about that here as we get into our discussion a little bit deeper. But again, making sure that all your applications and operating systems are as up to date as they can possibly be. Next form of attack we're going to talk about is a phishing attack. Again, a very common one for most that are on the call today. But a phishing attack, again, is where somebody is essentially sending out millions of emails in a lot of cases. And they're sending those out with an attachment or a link or something else contained within. And as a result, it goes to an end user. The end user sees it. They don't really pay a lot of attention to see who it's from, look at misspellings, look at a variety of other things that we've talked about in the past. And I would encourage you to check out from our January webinar on best practices. But at the end of the day, they're clicking on something that is resulting in the network being compromised. All right. So these are things that are really, honestly, very easy to protect against and identify if you know what to look for. Okay? And that's, again, why I would encourage you to go back and watch that webinar we did in January around cybersecurity best practices. But at a high level, just make sure that you go and hover over the name that it comes in from. Make sure that it lines up and it looks like it should. When you hover over it, you notice the domain is .cn or .ru, but when you don't, it's just .com. Well, that's somebody spoofing an email or putting up essentially a front. In reality, that's probably a cyber criminal working on the back end to compromise your network. In addition, if it's got links or attachments within it, don't click on them. Make sure that you're scrutinizing those heavily. Also, we would always encourage you to, subscribe to a security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. The one that we typically promote is KnowBe4. And the beauty of these solutions is that they do mock phishing attacks to get your users conditioned to know what to look for. In the event you have users that click on the wrong things, then it serves up videos and educational content on what to look out for next time to ensure ultimately that user understands exactly what is going on and what they need to do in the future to protect against the potential for attack. Installation of an anti-phishing toolbar such as Windows Defender browser protection can also help protect against these types of attacks. And then updating your passwords often. Okay, this is something that you're going to talk about a few times throughout this discussion today. But I am guilty of it myself. It's something I've got on my to-do list actually. I know that a lot of folks have probably seen this. Inevitably you're going out to Google and Google is telling you, hey, you've got X number of compromised passwords because those passwords were compromised through a data dump or something else that was discovered at a later date. So again, making sure that you're always updating those passwords when at all possible. Another type of attack that I think people are probably familiar with, but really just don't think about it that much, is a password attack. Okay, password attacks typically are conducted one of three ways. There's a brute force attack where it's essentially just going through a litany of different password combinations or identifying a password that may have been bought off the dark web, whatever the case might be, and compromising the network in that way. Dictionary attacks, are another example, and this is where you've got basically an entire database of more common passwords and things along those lines that an organization or a cyber criminal can essentially run through quickly and then see if they can't ultimately use one of those to crack into a network and in turn start wreaking some havoc. And then finally, one of the other things that we see are password reuse. Okay, this is where you have like 2 passwords and that's it, and you just reuse the same one. You just flip back and forth between them whenever it asks for you to update your username and password or your credentials. Again, reusing your password is one of the primary reasons that people get compromised, because they think, well, I changed my password, and then 6 months later they changed it back to what it was. And then that old password, the one they changed it back to, as it turns out, was actually exposed in the dark web. And in turn, they now have that password, even though you technically changed it. So again, how do we protect against these types of attacks? Well, first of all, using complex passwords, making sure they are alphanumeric and they usually have some form of punctuation in the form of a special character. The way that I find is the easiest is to use full sentences. Could be a line of poetry, a movie line, a song lyric. I tend to use positive affirmations. And in this case, it's going to be sentence case, capitalization, spaces in between each word, punctuation on the end. And if you find an E in there or something like that, turn it into a 3, and that's going to ultimately accomplish your alphanumeric complex password. Typically, this needs to be at least 16 characters long, and that's why I found over the years that sentences tend to help with that. Do not use the same username and password across all or multiple sites and accounts that you access on a regular basis or in general. Make sure that you update your passwords on a regular basis, as again, this is going to limit the potential for attack, and for an old password to be out there online on the dark web, it could result in you being compromised. Do not have password hints in the open. I will say it again. Do not have password hints in the open. I know it should go without saying, but I can't even begin to tell you how many organizations I go into where, hey, what are the admin credentials to get into the server? Oh, they're stuck in a post-it note right here. Okay. Again, that is not secure. Same thing at your local desktop or workstation. Don't have your password and username on a post-it note stuck to the bottom of your monitor, or even any hints as to what it might be. Again, just good practices in a lot of cases are just look at the obvious and don't do it. So again, don't have hints lying out in the open, and also implement multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, something along those lines. Multi-factor authentication would be where you go to log in, you enter in your username and password, and then it sends a notification, typically to your mobile device through something like Microsoft Authenticator, and that will either generate a random number for you, or in a lot of cases, just give you an approve or deny. Hey, somebody's trying to log into your account. Do you want to approve this? And of course, if that is in turn you, then of course you approve it, and off you go. But if you're not doing that, hit deny, and that bad actor that might be trying to compromise your account is no longer able to get in. Okay. Man-in-the-middle attacks. These are ones that, quite honestly, I don't hear a lot of folks talk about. But we'll talk about it here for a few minutes. We're going to defer to Dustin here in a second as well to get his opinion on these. But man-in-the-middle attacks are essentially where you have you communicating with an organization, and then as such, somebody inserts themselves into that conversation online, and in some cases even redirects that traffic and siphons it off completely to them, okay? So man-in-the-middle attacks are very difficult to identify, but this is one of the ways they steal and manipulate data. But again, Dustin, I would defer to you on this. I mean, is this a common thing that you see out there as far as man-in-the-middle attacks are concerned?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few different varieties of man-in-the-middle attacks. More traditional ones are things like fake access points. You know, you're in a Starbucks, someone plugs in a access point that's not actually through Starbucks. You log into that, and then you start using the internet through there, and all your traffic's passing through there, and they're able to grab things like passwords and stuff like that. So that's more of a traditional one. More recently, what we see is things like session hijacking, where you get a phishing email and you click on a link, and due to a vulnerability in that site or with the authentication that they use, they're able to get your token from there and then log on as you without credentials. Other things are seeing malware implement a man-in-the-middle type thing. So you get infected with some malware, and then maybe suddenly your DNS requests, you know, when you go out to go to certain websites, those DNS requests are being sent to them, and they're sending you to a fake website, and then you're entering your credential in there. So it's always a good idea, you know, if you're in public, always use a VPN if you're on the internet. Do things like use your phone as a hotspot as opposed to using Wi-Fi. Make sure you're using HTTPS for all your traffic. And then, as always, just make sure you have strong passwords and MFA. So even if they're able to grab your credentials somehow, at least you have an extra layer of protection.
And when Dustin talks about HTTPS versus HTTP, for those that aren't aware, HTTPS means you're on a secure website. So when you go out there, if you want to make sure you're on a secure site, it should have an S after the HTTP. A lot of times it's also going to have a little padlock somewhere, either in the browser bar, it might be down in the lower right-hand corner of the browser, something along those lines. So again, just making sure that you're on a secure site at all times and that you're using encryption to ensure that data is encrypted as it traverses back and forth and otherwise. And then again, as Dustin had said, using a VPN connection, trying to stay off of wireless networks if at all possible. Anything else to add there, Dustin, before we move on?
Just one more quick little note. What we're seeing a lot is more of like a manual man-in-the-middle attack where someone maybe breaches your email account because of poor passwords or you were phished and you typed in your password somewhere. And once they have access to your email account, they're actually kind of doing a manual man-in-the-middle where they're intercepting emails that are coming into you, maybe and sending out emails as you and intercepting the replies to that as well. So a lot of times they'll do that with like invoices. They're trying to get your customers to send payment to a new bank account and routing number instead of your previous one. It's pretty common in real estate, things like that happening with like closings and whatnot. If anyone's bought a house lately, you're usually warned about that pretty heavily because often people, end up sending thousands and thousands of dollars to the wrong location. So yeah, just always be wary.
Okay. All right. Another attack that I don't think a lot of folks are familiar with, but believe it or not, as Dustin and I talked and got ready for this today, what we found was it's still one of the top 10 or 15 types of attacks that take place out there, which is a SQL injection attack. Now, for those that are not familiar with what SQL is SQL is essentially a database. Okay, so for example, a lot of the small, medium-sized business owners that I work with use QuickBooks. QuickBooks has a SQL database on the back end. What you see ultimately is your user interface in the application, but somewhere, typically on the server, or it could be on the same device, the workstation, you have a SQL database that is ultimately where that information is coming from, as information is either keyed in or as information is extrapolated out. So the way that this works is that an organization goes in and injects malicious code into a vulnerable website through their search box, and in turn, it allows that server to reveal crucial information. Now, this can happen over time is that the hacker can get in, they can view, they can edit, and they can delete, but more importantly, they can actually set themselves up with administrative rights on your network. And that's when the real problems can occur because now they have rights to make changes to configurations or anything they'd like to. So again, SQL injection attacks are something a lot of folks don't hear a tremendous amount about. Dustin, I don't have a lot to protect against these, but can you talk a little bit about these and what organizations can do potentially to protect against a problem?
Yeah, so these SQL injection attacks are mainly an issue for any sort of maybe website that you guys host internally for an application you use. Say you have something like a CRM system or an ERP, and that's opened up to the outside world so people can get to it from home or they can get to it from client locations, etc. In those logon boxes and whatnot, what can happen is attackers can insert special lines of code that take advantage of certain vulnerabilities and then gain access to the system, like Chris alluded to. The most important thing to be aware of is just always make sure, mainly this is a development problem. It's an issue with the code itself. And the only way to really fix it is to install the latest security updates for your systems. The problem is a lot of these that we see in the past are no longer supported. It's some old system that people are using that they've had for 10 or 12 years, and it's no longer supported. So it just is what it is. And in that case, it's definitely recommended not to have that to the outside world. Put it behind a VPN, make your employees VPN in to gain access to it. Also, things like having a good firewall in place. They have intrusion protection systems or prevention systems, and they can actually detect these types of attacks taking place. And also, you can do things like GeoIP filtering, where you can say, hey, we don't want any traffic from Russia or China, et cetera, where a lot of these attacks take place. So at least you can stop any attacks from countries outside the United States, which it at least gets rid of a lot of them. But
Yeah.
some things to be aware of.
And then the final piece is really just making sure that you validate user supplied data and that you have a process to do so, making sure that data is kept in check when it's being input, et cetera. So again, it's a tough one, but once again, if you have applications residing that you're hosting within your organization, that's when this typically becomes an issue. Okay, so again, be mindful of how you're handling that and who has access to what. Denial of service attacks. This one is an interesting one because, and we'll talk to Dustin about it in a moment, but essentially what's happening here is that you have an organization or bad actors that are overwhelming a network. And as a result, those incoming requests from legitimate users are being denied because the network is just completely consumed with these requests that are coming from these bad actors. Now, the challenge here is, Dustin, and the question that I always ask is, everything else that we've talked about typically has a motivation, right? It's financial in nature. It is what it is. In this case, where you have somebody going in and doing a denial of service that is basically preventing a business from doing business, any thoughts on what the motivations here might be? What are they attempting to accomplish or to glean from this, or is there anything? Is this just a matter of doing something to cause problems?
Yeah, I mean, typically DDoS attacks or denial of service attacks are either revenge, someone's mad at a company for some reason, right? So, a company makes you mad, there's actually services you can hire to do these attacks for you, right? We don't honestly see these a ton in our space, I mean, they do happen, but typically these are things like someone's mad at a video game, so they hire some big DDoS service, or someone just wants notoriety for their hacking group or this, that, or the other. But usually it's either just to be a nuisance or a revenge type thing. The other thing that you do kind of see sometimes is people launching attacks like this to draw attention or avert attention elsewhere while some other attack is happening on maybe a different part of the network.
Oh, I see.
So they draw the attention over here, and then over here they're doing something that they're hoping maybe won't be noticed right now. But again, having a good firewall in place is the best thing you can do. If you're hosting some sort of critical service to the public, and it's a critical service, there are cloud provided DDoS prevention things that you can put in place. It's not a lot that we get into typically because, again, we don't see these a ton, but from time to time we do have to help clients with these.
Yeah. A couple other things there, just to add to what Dustin had said, is just making sure that you guys know what the warning signs are in the event something like this starts to happen, and don't create your own bottlenecks within your network. Specifically, if you see a network slowdown occur, you want to make sure that it's not due to something that you're doing versus somebody trying to compromise the network overall. What I mean by that is make sure that your infrastructure allows for full throughput. Okay, so make sure your switches are gigabit switches. Make sure that your firewall can manage the type of throughput and the connectivity that you have. Make sure all of that is there. That's going to make it a lot easier for you to identify a slowdown for some reason. So again, just ensuring you've got a full pass-through and you don't have any bottlenecks that are self-created. That way, if a slowdown does occur, you're not trying to isolate it internally, only to realize it was a denial of service attack that was actually taking place. Okay. So as we move on here, insider threat attacks. Okay. Again, this is something we've talked about a little bit throughout our discussion today. Somebody within the organization just wants to create a problem. Now, here's the bottom line. A lot of the folks that we work with, obviously, are small to medium-sized businesses. People within those organizations wear a multitude of hats. In a lot of cases, somebody who would not normally have the credentials that they have, they would not normally have those. And the reason they wouldn't is because, giving administrative credentials, say, to the receptionist in a large organization just simply wouldn't happen. But in a smaller business where, look, we need you to wear multiple hats and do some things and make some minor changes to stuff, and that requires you to have domain access to do that or domain admin creds to do that, well, that's a big problem. Because again, if that user becomes disgruntled for some reason or otherwise, they can go in and really start causing some problems across the network configuration. They can go in and make changes. They have access to pretty much anything they want to have access to. So again, insider threat attacks are a very real thing. I've seen it across a lot of the different organizations that I've partnered with over the years, where somebody is either getting ready to leave or has already left, or has left them a back door or something along those lines to compromise the network at a later date. Now, ways to protect against these: make sure that you have an organization that has a good culture of cybersecurity awareness. So what to look out for, essentially. Within most organizations, and of course I've been in the workforce as most people on the call here today for a number of years, it's unusual that somebody doesn't know that somebody is quitting or that somebody is extremely unhappy and doing something they shouldn't be doing. My point is that typically, like any other secret or anything else that's out there, there's usually one or two other people that know, right? So when that happens, train those employees to identify those internal threats, but also create a culture where they can say, look, I've got a concern in a confidential way, so that they are not concerned of any potential backlash that might come from the employee, or say they misread it and there's really no problem there, but it appeared to be a problem on the surface, just to keep everybody in good graces. And so you don't run into some issues internally with your internal team and their culture. And then more importantly, make sure, back to my example earlier, that even though you're a small to medium-sized business, that people do not have access to things they shouldn't have access to. If you have a server in place, you should have a domain on it, an Active Directory, and make sure that you're applying the right roles and responsibilities to those individuals based on what they actually need access to. So coming full circle, if it's a receptionist, they're probably going to need access to certain files and folders, whereas if it's a manager or a C-level person within the organization, they may have to have global access to everything, but make sure you've got them in the right bucket, so to speak, and that you're not giving global access to somebody who is an hourly employee, hypothetically speaking, who might part ways with the organization unexpectedly, because again, that's where a lot of times your problems can occur. Zero-day exploit. Okay, this is always a tough one to manage. We'll talk to Dustin here in a few minutes about this one. But zero-day exploits, they happen because, of course, a developer of a solution, an operating system or otherwise, says, hey, we identified a problem and we need to fix or build a security patch to fix the problem or do an update. But in that interim period, they have notified everybody. Of course, your day-to-day end user is happy to know because, well, I need to keep an eye out for this and make sure it's not a problem on my end. But by doing that, they're also notifying the bad actors out there that are the ones ultimately committing these attacks. So when it comes to zero-day exploits, there's a very fine line there in how we can address those. But, Dustin, why are zero-day exploits such a concern? I mean, I think we talked last time, we've seen this happen, correct?
Yeah, so like you alluded to, so typically a 0-day in general is, a vulnerability in a piece of software or hardware for that matter that can be exploited and used to cause harm. So the problem is a lot of times these 0 days are actually found by hacking groups or security companies, and they notify the vendor and they typically give them 30 days to fix it before it becomes public, just to let people know or whatever. But what happens in the interim is, so years ago when this happened, it would take months, year before it was really, really a big deal. Now we're seeing automated scanning and whatnot start almost immediately after 0 days come out. So a 0 day gets released, a hacking group finds out about it, they immediately start scanning the internet looking for these ports that are open for, recently this happened with Microsoft Exchange. So you guys may have heard of it in the news, but there was a vulnerability found in Microsoft Exchange that there was no fix for yet. Microsoft had just published patches after it came out, but immediately people start trying to take advantage of that. And it's basically a race between the vendor and the attackers at that point. And then we're obviously in the middle helping fend off the attackers. Sometimes they'll release mitigation techniques that you can do, like, hey, shut down this service or change this in a configuration file or whatever before they actually have a full patch out. So it's something that needs to be managed, because if your network's vulnerable to it and there is no patch for it that gets applied automatically, then something needs to be done or your network will be compromised due to it. So that's the main issue.
Makes sense. And again, I think it goes without saying, just based on everything we've discussed, and although it runs kind of counter to it because there may not be a patch in existence yet, but as soon as it becomes available, make sure you apply it. I mean, that's the best that you can really do in this situation because, as Dustin had indicated, it's really a race against time. Okay, so as soon as that patch becomes available, make sure that you got it out there, and also, again, creation of an incident response plan that in the event it does become an issue and a cyber attack does occur, that within the organization, you guys know exactly what to do, what resources to pull from, roles and responsibilities, all that good stuff to remediate and address that issue going forward. So we've covered a lot of ground so far, guys. I'm going to kind of bring this down to more of a funnel, if you will, as to a few last minute items here, and then we'll open it up to Dustin. But what attack impacts most small to medium-sized businesses? Well, from what we've seen, malware, password attacks, and phishing attacks, okay? I will say and add to this that we've also seen instances where people leave an open port on a firewall, and that is another area that a lot of organizations or bad actors do gain entry into an organization. But again, these are the main three that we typically see out there based on the different experience that we've had over the years and how most networks are compromised. So that said, what verticals are most targeted and for what reason? All right. So first off is finance. Okay. Finance, the threat actors, typically 64% of those are going to be external, 35% are going to be internal. I'm going to tell you as you look at these percentages, none of them add up to 100%. And the reason is because there's some overlap between somebody maybe coordinating with somebody internally on the outside that's ultimately trying to gain access in that way. Now, in the case of financial, of course, 91%, almost 100% of the time, it's to gain financial information, right? That's their motive, all right? Gain information about clients, gain information about different finances, et cetera, et cetera. The data that's compromised, usually personal information about an individual or client, credentials to access systems at a later date, and then banking information, accounting information, that kind of stuff to be able to access that data or to have it on file when the time presents itself that they can. Top controls for addressing this are going to be implementation of a security awareness and phishing training program, boundary defense. Again, Dustin's referenced it multiple times, boundary defense being a good firewall, ensuring that we have a good firewall in place that's an enterprise-grade firewall, and that we have secure configurations, back again to those sysadmins, and making sure that when they configure the environment, that the environment is configured in the most secure way possible and with no errors, if at all possible, for obvious reasons. Next is healthcare. Okay, healthcare, again, 51% external, 48% internal. All right, now I know that seems like, well, that's almost kind of crazy if that's 50-50 between the two. But the reason for that, in a lot of cases, is again, it's industry-based in some cases. So, if you have somebody, depending on what their level is within the healthcare practice, healthcare can be very difficult for a lot of folks to get into it for obvious reasons, especially over the last 12 months. The number of videos and podcasts and things that I have seen of people on the front lines with the pandemic and the COVID response and hearing some of their stories, obviously that can take a toll on people. And as a result, they can be disgruntled if they decide, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. And that's where those problems can once again occur. Now, the motives here are financial, admittedly. It's almost always financial, as we had established at the beginning of our discussion today, versus corporate espionage. But what they're looking for in this case is, most of the time, personal information, PII, personally identifiable information, any credentials they can access to get to that information, say through an electronic healthcare solution of some kind. So how do I get in there to get that information? And then ultimately, they're always still looking for banking information. So look, if we can glean a couple of account numbers and things along those lines as we're in here, may as well take advantage of that to see if we can't start reaping some of the benefits associated with that. Again, very similar top controls here. Ensuring that you've got people that are aware of best practice around cybersecurity, good firewalls in place, and having good data protection. That's going to be having that data encrypted while it's at rest on the machines as well as on the server. That's going to help. In addition to that, making sure that you have good backups in place and that you're doing everything that you guys can do to protect that data and maintain the integrity of said data. Information technology, that would be us, okay? We are a huge target simply because we work with 130, 135 different organizations of all sorts of different industry verticals and otherwise throughout the metro area, and quite honestly, these days throughout the United States. As a result, we have information they would like to get their hands on, okay, who are our clients. How do we get into those folks? So again, we do everything that we possibly can as an organization to ensure that no matter what happens, we are as secure as possible. That's why we have people like Dustin on staff here to ensure that we are always looking at what vulnerabilities are out there on the landscape, and we are assembling solutions to address those well in advance. The threat actors in the case of information technology, usually they're external, although you're going to have a percentage. They're going to be techies internally that, again, are your disgruntled folks or what have you. Again, almost always the motivations are financial. In this case, they're trying to get personal information or credentials because, again, they're trying to access the networks that we support. But we are not tied to you guys in a way where we're remoted in all the time or otherwise, where for some reason we did have something occur here that necessarily is going to translate to anything happening on your end. But I can tell you that due to the efforts that Dustin has put in place and his team over the years, to my knowledge, and of course I would defer to Dustin on this, I don't believe that we've had any sort of an instance over the decade or so that I've been with the organization. And if we did, it was a blip and it was resolved and remediated almost immediately. So again, but the way that you manage it in IT is making sure, again, that we've got good configurations in place. We've got a whole team of IT professionals here. That is their number one job. Continuous vulnerability management, okay, making sure that you have solutions in place to identify vulnerabilities and risks. And implementation, again, of cybersecurity awareness and training programs. So we internally here use KnowBe4 and have been using that solution now for roughly the last few years, and it's been very beneficial to make sure that we're all up to speed on what to look out for with malicious emails. Public administration, anybody who is familiar with the attack that occurred, I believe, on the city of Atlanta. I'll also tell you that there are attacks that have occurred here in the metro area that I'm not going to get into the city governments that were compromised for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, if somebody gets into one of these and identifies or realizes where they are, the ransom goes up exponentially. And the reason, obviously, is because in the example here in the metro area, they had locked them down that every permit they'd ever written, every judgment, every ticket, essentially anything that had to do with the city, the administration aspect of the city, the day-to-day operating of the city, whatever it might have been, it was a full lockdown. There was no way they could access any of that information anymore. And as a result, the bad actors said, well, we know what we've got. Here's what we want in return for it. So again, that's why public administration is such an appealing, vertical for these individuals to go after. Again, the top controls for this are going to be security awareness, because usually the way these are being compromised is somebody clicking on an email, again, an attachment or a link or something within. Making sure you got good boundary defense. We've seen some where they've come in through an open port on the firewall. So making sure you got a good secure firewall, that all the ports that need to be closed off are. And then again, having a secure configuration, making sure the data is encrypted while at rest, making sure that you've got good backups and disaster recovery solutions in place, that if this type of attack did occur, you'd be in good shape. Okay? And then finally, professional services. That's going to be basically your lawyers, your accounting firms, and so on. Again, their motivations here are typically it's 75% external. They're looking for financial data. They're trying to get personal information, credentials to access that data. And again, very similar top controls as this is concerned. So, key takeaways as far as all of this is concerned: implement a security awareness and training program within your organization. Again, we use KnowBe4. It's been great for us as an organization and for those that we partner with that use it. Introduce I apologize for the misspelling here. I thought I went through and cleaned it all up, but not a bounty defense, but a boundary defense system like a firewall. In this case, again, sonic wall is the provider that we tend to lean towards. But that said, making sure that you have a good, secure, enterprise-grade firewall in place with the different security features and functions, and making sure that licensing and everything is up to date to ensure you get the most current versions of firmware and otherwise. So, as we wrap up here, I'm really going to defer to Dustin because we're running light on time. So before I go any further, I want to just open it up for any questions that anybody might have as it relates to Dustin and what he might be able to answer. Any questions you have about hacking and types of attacks that you guys see out there. So, one that I see here is what are some of the common ways you've seen bad actors compromise networks, Dustin? What is typically what you see most of the time?
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of them. A couple times you'd mentioned a port being open in the firewall and whatnot. typically we've seen that one a lot in the past, and usually the culprit is RDP, or remote desktop protocol, which
Yeah.
is something that's built into Windows operating systems. A lot of times people will open up RDP to the outside world so people can access computers from home, etc.
Mhm.
Years ago, that was considered an okay solution. Now it's very easy to compromise. So we've seen, several companies hit that way. Also, weak or reused passwords. Once those passwords are out on the dark web, people are able to leverage those to either log into your network directly if you have services open, or maybe get into your email and then further their chain of attack that way. And then, yeah, attachments always coming through phishing, usually ones that are macro enabled.
Mhm.
If you open up a Word document and suddenly it's asking you to enable macros or to click here to do this, that, or the other, that's definitely a big warning sign. A lot of ransomware starts that way. So those are probably the three biggest ones that we've seen over the years.
Okay. Okay. Another question we have is what typically happens once an attack occurs? I mean, what does that kind of look like from the vantage point of an end user? If somebody, what should they be keeping an eye out for to ultimately go, oh my gosh, I think we got a problem.
Yeah. So again, one thing I would say is anytime you get an email with an attachment, know what it is before you open it. Even if it's from someone that, because what happens a lot of times is someone gets compromised. Maybe you get compromised, Chris, and you send out emails to people in your contacts. And even though I know you and we email sometimes, I'm not expecting you to be sending me a random invoice or a tracking number or whatever it may be. So if you do happen to open up one of these attachments and things don't happen as you expected them to,
Mhm.
it doesn't look normal. Always reach out to your IT provider. Let someone know that something has happened, because what could be happening if it's a macro enabled document is there could be code running in the background that's working on launching a ransomware attack. Other times, depending on the type of attack, if someone has remote access to the environment, say someone gets in through RDP,
Mhm.
you could, a lot of times they don't launch those attacks till the middle of the night. So
Ah,
3 a.m., they've got access to your network. They know the time zones and whatnot. They start encrypting your files. You come in the morning. Suddenly you just have, text documents and none of your files are
uh-huh.
accessible. You open them up and it's a ransom note telling you how to communicate with the hacker, etc. So just always be wary of like your computer slowing down, things not happening as you're expecting, missing data or emails. Just always be on the lookout, and if there's ever a question, it's always better to ask than to not and have it lead to
Sure,
a larger attack.
sure. Looks like I have one final question here because we've covered a lot of ground today. So if you really had to boil this down to one thing that an organization could do to protect themselves, what might that be, Dustin? Is there any one specific thing you can point to, or is it always going to be a combination?
Yeah, so as you know, security in general is all about layers, or what they call in the industry defense in depth. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's gonna make you truly secure, right?
Right.
It's an ongoing thing. It's ever changing. I mean, if I was to give one piece of advice to people, it would be don't ignore it and have a security assessment done. Know where you stand. Don't just assume that you're secure because nothing's happened to this point. Have an assessment done. Partner with some. If you don't have staff internally, if you don't have your own security team, get involved with a company to help you out and at least start doing something. That's the main goal. Don't just let it be, because things are just changing too fast, and we're seeing a lot of bad stuff happening out there. So just make an effort and get an assessment done and start getting a plan in place on how to secure your network.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, guys, as we kind of wrap up here, I don't see any additional questions coming in. So we'll just kind of put a dot on it, so to speak, or put a cross across this T, and just kind of just wrap up on some positive insight, I should say, around additional defenses. I'll be brief with these because we covered a lot of them today. But again, just as a reminder, making sure that your passwords have strong alphanumeric complex passwords that are comprised of at least a number, a letter, and a symbol, and are at least 16 characters long. making sure, again, that your operating systems and applications are updated regularly, protect against any potential vulnerabilities, zero-day exploits as we discussed today and otherwise, and use a trusted, centrally managed, monitored, and maintained antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware solution. Again, use of a firewall and other network security tools, and really security tools around your entire organization to prevent any unauthorized intrusion, be it physical or virtual, whatever the case might be. Avoid opening emails from unknown senders. We've touched on that multiple times. Make use of VPNs when possible to, again, give a secure connection to avoid those man-in-the-middle attacks if at all possible. Regularly back up your data. This one, I believe, goes without saying, but make sure you have a good image-based backup. Image-based meaning that is an image of the operating system, all servers, files, folders, and everything else contained within, not just files and folders only, and have a local version of that as well as an offsite version, usually hosted in a cloud environment minimum. And again, best practices dictate that you may, and I have a number of organizations that do this, that do a monthly, quarterly, or an annual backup of everything that they have sitting off in an external drive, so that way they always have a third location that they can defer to if they needed to. Again, have employees that are good, that are aware of cybersecurity principles and leveraging solutions, again, like KnowBe4, to keep those people up to speed on what to look out for. Use of two-factor or multi-factor authentication. This is something you're going to see more and more commonplace within the organizations that you work with, not just financial institutions, but you're going to see it across your retailers and otherwise. Because quite honestly, this is one of the most secure methods of logging in to any organization or network. Secure your Wi-Fi networks and make sure, if you're a business, that you've segmented those to a guest versus business network so that those guests that are getting on there are not getting on your side of the firewall, potentially accessing your data for some reason. And again, leveraging a VPN when possible, as opposed to using public wire or Wi-Fi. Safeguarding your mobile device to, again, make sure that it is in good shape and it is fully protected, because we are seeing more of those instances come up where mobile devices can be a vulnerability. So as we go through here, and I kind of changed it around a little bit, we already did our Q&A with Dustin, so I will bypass this. I just want to make sure that we got that in as we kind of wrap things up today. So thank you so much for all those that participated there. And then finally, as we wrap things up, how can we as an organization help? Well, you can always start by calling us at 866-829-5557. Just ask us how we can help, okay? Some of the ways that we help organizations that we partner with, those that are on the line today, as well as a variety of others. The number one way is we provide them with their IT support and their services. So basically, they partner with us, provide them with the maintenance, monitoring, management, the solution set, the stacks, the antivirus, anti-malware, the help desk support, the backup management, the vendor management, all of that stuff all rolled together in one solution set that we put together and then we provide to the clients, roughly 130 or so that we support in and around the St. Louis metro area today. Boundary defense solutions, that's going to be things like firewalls and different hardware solutions, as well as software solutions that may exist out there to assist in ensuring that your network is secure as possible. We do offer a secure remote VPN connection. We introduced it at the offset at the beginning of the pandemic back last March, called Everfuel Secure Remote Access. There is a minimal fee associated with this, but if it's something you want to implement across your organization, you can. Just reach out to us. We'll get it in place. It is a month-to-month, so at any point in time, you can cancel if everybody starts going back into the office again and you no longer need this method of secure connection. Again, we are a Datto Blue partner, meaning that we are the highest accreditation as Datto Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery Solutions are concerned. These are the Cadillac in the industry as it relates to backup solutions that ultimately ensure that your organization is always up and operational, meaning that if you have a failure of a network, server, or otherwise, or you're compromised by an attack, you can go back to a backup that's versioned on a local appliance that can actually run the network if it needs to, or you can pull down the most current version prior to the attack from the Datto cloud environment. And then KnowBe4 security awareness and training. We've talked about that a number of times today. For anybody out there, it's a very low-cost solution that can really ensure that your users are always and consistently up to date on the different threats that may exist out there and what to do about them. And then finally, things like Huntress and Barracuda. Barracuda, with its spam filtering product and advanced threat protection. And then Huntress does something a little bit different, where they're doing advanced persistent threats. So what Huntress is doing is essentially going out there in your network and digging deep to identify changes and to identify those threats that are out there that are really buried, that maybe you're working in the background that nobody knows about, but ultimately those are considered to be advanced persistent threats because they continue to persist no matter what you do with your antivirus or anything else. So again, these are the different ways that we've been able to assist and partner with the organizations that we partner with. So if you want more information on any of these, you can always reach us at sales@throttlenet.com. You can reach me at chris@throttlenet.com, or you can dial the number that I had on screen earlier. I'm more than happy to talk you through those. And if you are a current client of ThrottleNet in a managed services capacity, your VCIO would be able to help you in this area as well. So reach out to them directly and they can offer some insight on how we can help to secure your network and educate your users a little bit better. So we are finished. We are right at 11:54 p.m., so we're coming in just about 5 minutes early on this one. So as we wrap up here, I want to first off start by thanking Dustin for his participation today. So Dustin, thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It was
Thank you so much. And again, I always appreciate everybody joining us today. Hopefully you gained some benefit from our discussion. And we will be rolling out a new webinar. Not quite sure, quite honestly, at this point in time, we're going to be covering here in April. But I'll be getting something together real soon. We'll be sending out information on that. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you then and there. So in the interim, go out and get your vaccinations if you want to. I'd encourage you to do so if at all possible. And as we get closer to the summertime, I hope more and more people are out there having a good time as things start to normalize a little bit. So thank you so much again for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good day.